At this time, we're going to go to 9.0, which are action items. We're going to go to 9.1, which is the temporary suspension of board policy IKAA, test and examinations. And let's go ahead and get a motion and a second on the floor, and then we'll get Dr. Talley to walk us through it. So do I hear a motion that the board approve the administration's request to temporarily modify board policy IKAA, tests and examinations due to COVID-19?
Madam Chair, under the guidance of policy BDH, suspension of policies, which gives the board the ability to temporarily suspend board policies due to extreme emergencies, I move that the board approve the administration's request to temporarily modify board policy IKAA, tests and examinations due to COVID-19. The modification would temporarily adjust the cumulative end-of-course examination weight to 10% in the final course average.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Do I have a second? Okay, thank you, Ms. Green. Okay, Dr. Talley, we're going to turn it over to you to walk us through this recommendation, and then we'll take a vote after that, board. So, Dr. Talley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Dr. Guyton mentioned in his prayer, these are very unusual times. They're difficult times for our school district, and we are examining all of our policies, and we have done that with our instructional practices for tests and examinations. And in that examination, we have determined the need to temporarily suspend policy IKAA, tests and examinations, and that is allowed by the board policy, suspension of policies. Districts have also received a memo, superintendents did, from State Superintendent Molly Spearman, giving districts the permission to waive the current 20% requirement for all end-of-course assessments taken in the 2020-2021 school year as part of a student's final grade. The superintendent did give districts the flexibility to waive all of that percent or to make a determination about what percent that would count. And in our district, we have determined that we would want to weight that 10%. And I'm requesting your approval of that this evening. I will tell you that this policy has not been revised since 2005. So the reason we're temporarily suspending the policy is Dr. Rivers will work with a team to later in the year to revise that whole policy in totality. So I am seeking your approval for that tonight.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Talley. Are there any questions or comments, board, before we take a vote?
I'd like to make a comment here. I did some homework on this and contacted several teachers, retired and current teachers, just to ask them how they feel about it, you know, as it was presented to us. And I had no idea how strongly they felt about this. But I think they'd like to see this permanently, is the way I read it. So.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll tell you, I too have reached out to our teachers, as has Dr. Rivers, and we've reached out to our principals and certainly our instructional team, and they feel like this is the right move, so I appreciate you saying that. And I will tell you that we will be having a robust conversation later this year about grading in general. So that should come as no surprise to any of you.
Dr. Talley, I actually have a question, and this is probably just semantics, but my brain is a little confused on this. So are we suspending the policy, or are we changing the policy from 20 to 10%?
We are changing the policy temporarily from 20% weighting to 10%.
Okay, so we're not suspending the policy IKAA. We
That's
are
right.
modifying the policy temporarily.
We have a policy that allows us to do what we're doing. Does that help?
And I think the reading of the actual, do I hear a motion from the board to approve the administration's request to temporarily modify
That's right.
the board policy? And I think the heading might be, it says suspension, but I believe modify is the correct word, and that is the language we're approving.
That is
So
correct.
thank you, Ms. Green.
Yes.
That's a good point. Okay, any other questions or comments, board?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. I got a lot of feedback from teachers as well, and they're concerned that they won't even come close to covering the material that's in these EOC exams. And they said these students will be responsible for all of that content, and yet that test will still count as 10% of their entire semester grade. And I have pulled up the memo from Molly Spearman as well, and she says in there that teachers can have discretion in counting any teacher-developed or curriculum-based measurement in the calculation of the grades. Why can we not do away with the EOC and come up with something district-wide to let teachers come up with a test that counts for 10%?
Well, the state is requiring that students take the end of course. That's not negotiable.
Right.
What the waiver would do is you would not have to count at anything. And we do feel that there should be a measure of accountability. And we feel like 10% is that measure of accountability.
But if they're being assessed on information that they haven't even covered during that semester, because it's my understanding that the EOC exam is not being modified because of COVID, but teachers won't have time to cover all of that curriculum during the semester.
Well, and I do feel like that we will work with our students and certainly give them all the grace we can during this time, but the recommendation is for 10%.
Okay. Does anybody else have any thoughts? Because, I mean, they're going to be tested on material that hasn't been covered.
I mean, Dr. Talley, have you had any feedback from teachers, or maybe Dr. Rivers can address this, that their pacing is off and that they won't complete the curriculum in time for the EOC?
Well, remember, in the hybrid model, our students are working 4 days, 2 days face-to-face and 3 days online. So, I mean, I feel like they're doing the very best they can. I feel like they're doing a really good job. We have looked at, Dr. Rivers and I spoke earlier this evening, we have analyzed the first quarter grades, and I feel pretty good about where we're headed, at least in our hybrid model.
Well, and kind of as far as like considering the calendar, they will, when the EOC falls in January, they will have the same amount of time that they would typically have.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, I just know some teachers said, for example, my suggestion would be to let EOC courses make their own final exam that counts 10% instead of the state EOC. That way the teachers know what they have taught, and then they can administer the test based on what they've taught and not a test that's been given to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can appreciate that, but I will say that moving forward, students are going to be held accountable for the EOC. Not only this
Right.
year, but subsequent years. I don't see that going away.
Right, but in this year, I mean, you know, everything has changed. And if they're saying, did this go through a committee or anything? This 10%, how did we come up with that figure?
We did, Dr. Rivers met with high school principals and assistant principals and instructional staff. And I also will tell you that all of the districts in the Midlands are doing 10%. I did check with chief academic officers to find out what they were doing.
Okay. I just know the teachers I've talked to, they would just like to see something done differently. But along those lines as well, policy IKA, it also contains an administrative rule that applies the 20% weighting to the EOC as well in that policy. So that's one that would have to be, I guess, modified, suspended, whatever language we're using there. And as I was reading through that policy, I came across, as part of that policy, students' progress in grades 2 through 12, it says is reported with a numerical grade and a letter grade. We got an email on September the 25th that says some tweaks were being made to the grading practices at the elementary school. And so I later found out that student progress is now being reported as a performance rating, such as not yet met, partially met, not assessed. This would require a board vote as well if we're actually changing the way we're reporting grades and student progress.
That's right, and that when I said we are going to revisit those policies, that would include the elementary grading as well. I believe, I can't remember what board meeting, but I believe Mr. Bowers presented to the board the new way we were going to be assessing students in elementary and how we're going to report those grades.
Okay. I know someone sent me a report card, and I was thinking, well, if that's part of a policy and the board never voted on it, I didn't know how that was possible that we changed the grading scale, but, okay.
Any other questions or comments, board?
I will say, I would, I know I've talked about this in the past, I would like for the board to have their own committee made up of teachers, school staff, because I'm hearing they're also required to give nothing less than a 45 on individual assignments. They were told that the 9 weeks grade couldn't be lower than a 45, but now they're being told that they can't give anything lower than a 45 for an assignment. So students are thinking along the way, whereas they would normally have a 0 as a placeholder if they didn't do their work. Now they have to put a 45 there, so students actually think their grade is higher than what it is. So now they're doing even less than what they would be doing.
I can respond to that. Ms. Garris, that has actually been in place,
Probably
I
8
guess,
or
6 years
yeah, I was gonna
ago
say
when we
8 years
changed our
maybe.
grading practices. We had lots of conversations from a lot of stakeholders, and we did a lot of research. And this district decided at that time to not give a grade of 0 to students. Because if you're averaging a 0 at the very beginning of a quarter, the student is defeated for the rest of the year. So that's when we did change our grading policies. That's not new.
Right, for the end of 9 weeks, they would go back and put a 45, but now they're saying, I guess in the past, it hadn't been done on individual assignments. So now teachers are saying, whereas they would put a 0 in for an individual assignment and then go back at the end of the 9 weeks and change the grade to a 45 if it was anything less than that. Now they're actually having to put a 45 in there instead of a 0 along the way.
Well, again, it's to give grace to students, and in a time that we're in where we feel like there needs to be a lot of grace given so we do no harm to students.
Any other questions or comments, board? Okay, hearing none. We do have a motion on the floor from Mr. Oswald. We have a second from Ms. Green. I'm going to reread the motion. The motion is to approve the administration's request to temporarily modify board policy IKAA regarding tests and examinations due to COVID-19. You've heard the response from Dr. Talley. All in favor of modifying policy IKAA, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries and it is unanimous.